Welcome back to the Heights podcast. At Heights, our mission is to love and to lead all people to a new life with Christ. One of the ways that we do that is by recording podcast episodes like this one, where we explore issues regarding faith, the culture, and the church. We are currently in a series of podcasts about the names of God. This is the third episode in our Names of God series. And I'm excited today to be joined by Pastor Jonathan McMeans, who is our pastor to students and also our pastor of Connections. My name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors here at Heights, and we're going to go ahead and dive right in. Jonathan, glad you're here with us today.
It's really good to be here.
All right, so this is week 3 in our Names of God series. And so first week we talked about the Lord is my shepherd.
Right.
And then last week we talked about a couple of more kind of technical names for God. We talked about Yahweh, which is God's personal name. It's the name that God gave his people. It's his kind of covenantal name. It's a proper name. And then we also talked about the word Adonai, which is a title, which means my Lord. And so this week we are actually going to be going to a name that's very significant because it actually only occurs in one verse in the Bible. And that's going to be Genesis chapter 16. And what's the verse that we're going to be exploring today?
Verse 13. And in this specific chapter, like you said, it's only in one place, but we see that God is referred to as the God who sees, or the God who sees me. And so it's a really interesting story. It's actually a story that I really, to say I like it, it's a moving story. Every time I read it, it's something that impacts me personally as a youth pastor. But I know that we're going to get into that in a little bit. Let's get back to telling them what the Genesis 16:13 is about.
That sounds good. All right, so the Hebrew word that we're going to be talking about today is El Roi. And like you mentioned, El Roi is the God who sees, or maybe the God who sees me. One of the things that's important to realize when you're working with a foreign language is words don't always translate one exactly to another in another language, and so there's kind of some variation of meaning there. So the God who sees, the God who sees me, those are both kind of ideas that come from this word El Roi. And so we're going to go to Genesis chapter 16, and just to summarize what happens here. God has promised Abraham that he's going to have many children, that he's going to make him a great nation, and he's going to be a blessing. He's going to have land, and his family is going to be a blessing to all the nations of the world. But Abraham's well into his 80s at this point, and he and his wife Sarai don't have kids yet. And so Sarai comes up with this plan. See, they have this slave girl that they've brought with them out of the land of Egypt. God delivered them out of the land of Egypt. They brought the slave girl with them. And Sarai's idea is, well, you can have a relationship with my slave girl, and maybe she'll give you a child, and that'll be the way that God brings forth this promise. And this is not something that was a part of God's plan. This is Abraham and Sarai taking matters into their own hands. But now you're in a situation suddenly where Hagar has a child. She's carrying Abraham's child, and now Sarai is furious and is turned on her and is abusing her. So why don't you go ahead and take us from there? So
from that point, you have Sarai, who planned the pregnancy, that hates Hagar, her servant, and so Hagar runs. Like just takes off. And in the middle of the wilderness, she has this encounter with God. God appears to her, and he tells her to go back and promise to multiply her own offspring. So I think that's kind of interesting. The promise was to Abram that he would have just an immense offspring. And now, because Abram took things into his own hands, doing things his own way, now a portion of that blessing that was Abraham's is now given to the one that was wronged in Hagar, right? And I love it. With this encounter, she responds to God. When God confronts her, when God shows up, she says that you are the God of seeing, or you are the God who sees me. And I love it because it says that she calls God by name, and then the name that she calls him is the God of seeing. El Roy is the Hebrew language. And then she comments after that, truly here, I have seen him who looks after me. That's a great picture of a person that's been wronged, sinned against, oppressed. And God says, no, 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 I look after the oppressed.
That's right.
I am the God who takes care of the broken, the maligned, the outcast, the ones separated from society, the one that the promised ones, the chosen ones, the church even sometimes oppress. God sees them. He is the God of seeing, taking care of those that are in need.
God is the one who sees the unseen.
Absolutely.
You know, I was thinking about the fact that sometimes when we're dealing with trauma, when we're dealing with crisis, when we've been sinned against, we can often kind of feel invisible.
Right.
You know, we can kind of ask ourselves the question like, does anybody know? Does anybody care? Does anybody see me? And we were talking before we sat down to record. We were talking a little bit about some of the statistics, particularly, and I was wondering if you could speak to us, kind of from a student ministry perspective, about some of the kids that we might know that might be a part of our church or a part of our community, and some of the ways that they might be dealing with situations that might be similar to this one.
Right. Well, I know, first of all, ministering for the last several years to Gen Z, they have a really big inclusivity when it comes to oppressed people. And so if there's people that they feel like society is shunning, they're, as a generation, largely as a whole, I mean, not every individual, obviously, but as a whole, the unit kind of pulls in people that are oppressed. And you see that a lot with like the LGBT movement. And so one of the things that I've learned working with Gen Z specifically is they have hearts in a very good place at dealing with people who are oppressed and showing love to people that are wronged. But one of the statistics that comes up dealing with this specific topic is we see this young lady that was violated against her own will.
That's right. She probably didn't have any say in this matter.
Probably not. She was a slave girl. And if you think about it, Abram and Sarai were her masters. They were the ones that came up with the plan. So there was a person that's mentioned that didn't have a say in the matter as far as we read. She was the one that was sinned against, that was wronged in this instance. And statistically these days, we can't say that's something that has happened just in history. Statistics that are coming out in the last couple of years indicate that one in four young ladies are sexually abused in their lifetime. Wow. And I'm thinking about this as a dad of a daughter, and I know you've got several daughters as well. Our student ministry had over 40 young ladies that came through our doors at some point. We actually had probably more like 60 young ladies that came through at some point throughout the year. And to think if it was 4, because it makes it quite a bit easier if it's 40 or 60, when you think of it, that means somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 of those young ladies either have been sexually abused or will be sexually abused in their lifetime, according to statistics. And as a dad of a daughter, that's a scary statistic, a repulsive statistic. And one of the things that I love about the God that we have the privilege of serving is he is a God that takes care of those that have been abused.
That's right.
He is a God that sees and loves unconditionally the one that has been through the traumatic experience that I honestly, I can show empathy and compassion for them, but I can't put myself in their shoes. I don't know that feeling of hurt, but I do know that is very common. As a student pastor of more than 10 years, I have encountered this numerous times over the years. So
that's just like, that blows my mind to think about it. I mean, I've got 4 kids at home. 3 of them are girls.
Right.
So I mean, I'm just doing some math here, and it's kind of a scary, statistically speaking, it's scary numbers that are in my head right now. But and it's so hard because there's so many kind of dynamics of guilt and shame and fear that surround this kind of an issue. That
right.
It's also very likely that a lot of instances of abuse might go undercounted or underreported or go unreported. So I'm thinking sort of like what's our response to this? So the good news that we have from Genesis 16:13 is that our God is a God who sees. He's
right.
a God who sees us. He's a God who sees. He's the God of seeing. And so then the question that I have is sort of like what is our response? What is that knowing that about God? How does that cause us to live? How does that cause us to think about how we live our lives?
So here's the way that I would say this. If I was dealing with a parent or a student who was going through this situation, I would say that God is a God who sees. He's a compassionate God that understands, that sympathizes, and I want to see too. As a pastor of the gospel dealing with teenagers, I want to be able to see too. I want to have the eyes of God, the eyes of Christ, seeing the way that God sees. And since God is a God of seeing, the defender of those who have been wronged, right? It's my prayer that God would make his church, this church, a place where people are seen, heard, and cared for. And we don't turn away folks, even when it's uncomfortable. Yeah. Even if they're the margins of society, that we would be a church that was willing to share the love of Christ, the gospel for all people. You remember, Christ encounters prostitutes and tax collectors. He sits with them. He has meals with them, right? And so the God that sends Christ and loves the sinner expects the same of his church. Unfortunately, you don't see that very often. There is a passage that is in the book of 1 John. And 1 John is a great passage that's close to my heart, but in 1 John chapter 3, it says, if anyone has the world's goods, right? If anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? And I see the word there in common is he sees. So the God who sees the oppressed and is there and cares and sympathizes and advises and guides and restores and redeems. But when the church comes about it and they see and they say, I see it, but that's not really my problem. Well, John.
Or I'm afraid, or it makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
Or isn't there somebody else who can handle this?
Right.
Or I mean, I'm trying to think. I'm not qualified to deal with this situation.
Right.
I'm not cut out for this. I didn't sign up for this.
Right.
I mean, you can have people who are loving, compassionate people who maybe a feeling of inadequacy, feel like I can't. This is above my head. This is above my pay grade. This is more than I can handle.
Right.
And the reality is that Jesus came and he got messy, and he got into all kind of people's mess. I was thinking a good illustration of this is the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Oh yes.
Where in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the first 2 guys that walk by and see the guy standing on the side of the road are the Levite. Or the priest. The Levite
right.
and the priest. So those are both church people. Those are like church staff.
Right.
And they were on their way to do something very important for the Lord.
Right.
But they didn't take the time, and they even kind of crossed on the other side of the road. And so one of my favorite worship songs that we sing sometimes says, "Break my heart for what breaks yours."
Yes.
So may that be may that be our prayer as a church, that we would be a people that would have the mind of Christ and that would have the eyes of Christ to see those who are unseen. And so I think as we look at this passage, on the one hand, we can have that assurance that God sees us.
Yes.
And we can rest in the fact that whatever it is that we might be going through, God is aware. God sees everything. God knows exactly what we're going through. But then I think the other kind of application that we can draw from this name of God, this El Roy, is that we need to be a people who are willing to see the people who are unseen. We want to reach out to the oppressed. We want to be God calls us to love, the poor and the orphan and the widow and the immigrant, those who have been kind of pushed to the edges of society. And so I'm just thinking of ways that we can kind of do that in our community. What are some ways kind of locally that we can sort of, be there for people that have been wronged, people that have been sinned against?
So my thought on that is, first of all, never underestimate the power of prayer. And I know that's not just a Sunday school answer, right? But I know that on my computer, my daily workstation, and also in my truck, I've got stickers that remind me to pray for refugees.
Oh, that's good.
And so every morning, I open up my workstation to get ready to do ministry for students, and the first thing that I'm greeted with is a sticker that says "Pray for Refugees." When I get into my truck in the morning, I'm driving Adelaide to daycare, and I look down, and right next to the shifter, there's a sticker that says "Pray for Refugees." And I use that not to just pray for refugees, but it's a reminder that there are people facing oppression. There are people that are facing difficulties that we can't necessarily always wrap our minds around. But God is a God that loves the immigrant. He loves the refugee. He loves the burdened. He loves the abused. He loves people that sin differently than I do, Matt. And when we're looking at this picture of a refugee status, the way that I pray for those every morning, like I don't skip mornings of this. Every time I get in my truck, I see that sticker right there, and I pray not only for them, but I pray for my soul as well, that I would be able to see the needs of those that I serve, of those that I work with, and that I would be able to show the love and actions of Christ as I communicate with them and as I do life with them. I think that there are some more applicable steps, but I think for the average listener of this podcast, I would say that is a great starting point.
Great place to start.
Make it your intro to your morning. You say, God, I believe that you are good, you are great, and whatever your prayer life looks like in the morning, which I'm sure a lot of the people listening have that already, throw in there, and God, help me see the marginalized.
That's good.
Help me understand better. Help me understand better these people that are oppressed, that are hurting, that have been abused, that have been cast aside, that won't be heard by so many people, that will be misbelieved by some people, even. It's God, give me eyes to see the way that you see. Give me the ability to listen the way that you would have me to listen as I minister to these students, these young people, these families that are going through it.
So in addition to praying for the marginalized and the oppressed, I'm thinking specifically kind of to a similar issue that Hagar may have been dealing with, somebody who may be in crisis, somebody who may be dealing with abuse. And I was just wondering if there's some resources or some organizations kind of right in our own backyard where we could get involved, we could help, we could support, get more information, or get help if we need it.
Yeah, just thinking of a few. I know that we as a church have supported Kids Harbor, local in our area. It's a foster unit. And in addition to Kids Harbor, we've got multiple families in our church that have fostered children. And so our church as a whole has been very loving to kiddos who are in the foster care system. And oftentimes those are people that get overlooked when you're looking at ministries in general. So I would say doing stuff with organizations like Kids Harbor, or if you have a bigger availability, maybe even praying about fostering yourself in your family. I know we've had several in our church that would probably be able to point in the right direction if that was something that you were considering. You could contact the church, and we would love to point you to people that have done that. And then in addition to those, I think also there is the Crisis Pregnancy Center that we support as a church that takes care of women from really all walks of life. Very diverse group of people that use that ministry and that help in that ministry. But it's a great way. When we're seeing the God who sees, you have to remember this is a God who sees a marginalized woman, and supporting a ministry that's focused on taking care of women who don't know what their next step is an incredible place. I know that there's a bunch of neat things that ministry does. And again, if you're looking at ways to get involved with that ministry, you could contact us at Heights as well, and we would love to get you in the right direction on that.
Yeah, my wife actually worked at that Crisis Pregnancy Center for many years as a volunteer, and had opportunities to share the gospel with lots of ladies, had the opportunity to do ultrasound. She actually volunteered as an ultrasound technician, and just had really incredible stories of opportunities and interactions that she was able to have with these young ladies who don't know, like you said, they don't know what their next step is. You know, they're living in crisis. They're in a situation that they never planned on being in, and they're trying to figure out what that next step is. You know, and to let these ladies know that they're seen, that someone sees them, and someone sees that the crisis that they're in.
Right. I would say one more is, and I know that this is a little self-serving, but with statistics like the one that we quoted earlier, 1 in 4 women, I think it's something like 1 in 6 young men also dealing with sexual abuse specifically. And when you get just general abuse, that number actually goes way up from there. I would say another way you could get involved in working and ministering and loving Gen Z would be to contact myself or Miss Caroline, our children's minister, and one of the two of us could show you ways that you could serve some of these younger members of society that are coming into the church. Many of them even unchurched when they come in. And so come serve our student ministry, serve our children's ministry. And that would be another way that you can serve.
That's a great word. I think that's actually a great place to end it, to go ahead and wrap it up. El Roy, the God who sees, the God who sees me. We want to say thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Heights Baptist Church podcast. We typically do one of these every week, usually release them on Wednesdays. And we're also here on Sunday mornings. You can join us at our campus in person. We have worship services at 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. And so you can join us for worship if you're local in the southern Houston area. You can come find us. We also live stream on Facebook and YouTube, and so you can go over there and subscribe, get all of our content, updates from all of our video content, our podcast content, opportunity to join us in worship in that way. We actually have a new website that's recently been launched, and Jonathan actually did a lot of the work putting that together, so I want to say thank you, Jonathan, for making that happen. So I invite you guys to go ahead to head over to heightschurch.org and see the new heightschurch.org, and you can get more information about our church and how you can take your next step in your faith journey. We will see you next week.